So 2017, I decided to go back to the accident site. And everything looked different from when I was here in 2013. This is the site of the 2013 Yarnell Hill Fire, where 19 Granite Mountain Hotshots lost their lives. And I'm wandering around. It's been 4 years. Nothing looks the same. The brush has grown back. I'm trying to find my way. And the reason I was there was because I was determined to find some way to learn something meaningful, some kind of meaningful lessons from this tragedy that could be shared with other firefighters to help serve the fire service for the future. So I finally find the spot that I'm looking for. And where it is it's this spot near the lunch spot. I call it the Hunker Rocks, where it's the last place where the crew is together, and we have pictures, and the guys are okay, and they're smiling and joking around, and everything's all right. I looked at those pictures a lot during the investigation because it's our last glimpse into what was happening with them before the decision was made to leave the black. And so I went up to that spot and I sat on this flat rock. And as I was looking around, because I had spent so much time watching these videos and looking at these pictures, my mind sort of superimposed the guys onto the rocks around me. And I sat there looking at what they were looking at, trying to think about maybe what they could have been thinking about, looking for some lesson, some insight, something that we could take away for the future. I had nothing. I had nothing. Because we don't know, I don't know how they made the decision to leave. The whole accident turns on this moment right here, and we really don't know how it happened. There are 4 big theories, or 4 big kinds of theories that are out there. So you have a 20-person crew, and the theory is that maybe the superintendent wanted to leave, and then crew members didn't like that idea, but they went along with it anyway and didn't speak up. That's one theory. Second theory is maybe the assistant superintendent, the captain, maybe he was the one that wanted to leave, and he kind of drove that decision. Another theory is that maybe the decision was made together, and the guys who were there either didn't see risks or didn't speak up about the risks that they saw. And then there's a 4th theory, which is that maybe there's some pressure that came in from outside, one way or another, that influenced the crew's decision making. When I say these are 4 theories, what I mean are, after the accident, I traveled around the country doing my best to share what I could, what I did know, what I did understand about this event. And I listened to firefighters tell me their ideas. And it's speculative, you know. This is just firefighters coming up with ideas, trying to explain what we don't have an explanation for. And me personally, from an investigator mindset, I didn't put a lot of stock in this speculative churning, you know. But as I'm sitting up here, something struck me. And what struck me was this idea of all these theories, all these ideas that firefighters have. They all have something in common. They all involve firefighters on the crew seeing the risk, but not speaking up about it, or not speaking up about it effectively. That's what all the speculative scenarios have in common. And what dawned on me that day was, maybe this tells us something. It may not tell us something about what happened on 30 June 2013, but maybe it tells us something about firefighters. So there's this gap in what we know, and what's happening is that people try to fill that gap so so that it makes sense. But what are they filling the gap with? Well, they're filling the gap with the things that we fill the gap, with the things that we know, what we've seen, what makes sense to us. We fill it with what we're afraid of, with what we know is possible, what we don't want to happen, what we think could happen, right? In other words, what firefighters are filling that gap with is, it's a window into the fire service. It may not tell us something about what happened on 30 June 2013, but it may tell us something about us and how we operate. And I think what it reveals is that we know there's an issue when it comes to speaking up effectively about risk. I think every leader's nightmare is something bad happens to their crew, and then afterwards they find out the crew members saw things starting to go wrong. They heard problems. They knew things were on the wrong track, but they didn't speak up about it effectively. And that information didn't make it to the crew leader. So what we're going to talk about today is, I don't want that nightmare to become your reality. And I've done plenty of firefighter interviews after close calls, accidents, even successes. And I've heard that. I've never once heard somebody say, boy, I really am sure that when the guys were scared, nobody said anything about it. I've never heard that. I've heard a lot of guys with a lot of regret learning over the course of the investigation, discovering that actually the warning signs, there were people in the situation that saw the warning signs, and for whatever reason, that information never actually made it to the people who were making the decision. So what can we do? Well, that was my big insight that day, was look, we've been hearing for at least my entire career, I was told, if you see something, say something. If things are starting to go wrong, speak up. But how often does that actually happen? How often does it happen that things are starting to go wrong and the people in this situation are able to speak up effectively in a way that serves the decision makers and then take a new direction? How often have you done that, right? How often have I done that? It doesn't happen as often as we'd like to think. Why? Why is that? The traditional answer is the reason it doesn't happen is because bosses are overbearing, and that's why it doesn't happen, is because the bosses are mean, and so the crew members don't speak up. That's why. That's the old story. But it seems to me that's not very true, because I work for great bosses and I work for some not so great bosses, and let me tell you, firefighters don't speak up effectively. It's not about how cool your boss is. So what can we do about it? Well, this insight inspired me to go back and look at my own experiences as a firefighter, the fires that I was on, the times I tried to speak up, the times I was successful, the times I wasn't, the times I didn't speak up. And it made me go back over the investigations other people's investigations, my own investigations, and I went out and I just started talking to other firefighters. One conversation after another, one by one. Have you ever spoken up effectively on a fire? Why? Why not? When does it happen? When does it not happen? And what I discovered changed my perspective on this whole issue of speaking up effectively. I'd like to share with you a couple key concepts, and then I want to share with you a practical tool that you can use right now on your crew to level up your leadership and communication on your crew. So the first thing is that a lot of our training and policy and a lot of our investigations, a lot of how we approach communication is based on the idea that fire is basically safe, stable, straightforward, and simple, right? So we have these ways that we're taught to communicate that are very, very effective almost all the time, because usually where we are operating for practical purposes is pretty safe. What we're dealing with is pretty simple, right? Firefighters don't have any problem saying that somebody took their ice cream out of the freezer and they shouldn't have done that, but they did it, right? We don't have problems speaking up in a 4S environment. But here's the point. When things are falling apart on a fire, it's not like that. The fire environment is inherently dynamic, risky, complex, and ambiguous. DARC, D-A-R-C, dynamic, ambiguous, risky, and complex. And so one of the reasons that communication breaks down just when you need it the most is because the way that we have learned to communicate and the way that we are good at communicating is calibrated for an environment that's a 4S environment. But now you're in these moments that are dark. This moment where it becomes extremely risky, extremely dynamic, extremely complex, ambiguous, right? How do you talk about that thing that's going wrong when you're not sure what that thing is? You're not sure if it's actually going wrong. You're not sure when it's going to go wrong. Is it going wrong right now? Or is it going to go away and then this other thing is the real problem, right? That's the nature of these moments that we're talking about. And so I began to ask myself, so then why is it that firefighters don't always speak up effectively when the moment calls for it? Now, of course, I just want to acknowledge very briefly, this whole issue of communication is much more complex than just why don't people speak up, right? This is a very multifaceted issue, but you got to kind of anchor in somewhere and then flank, right? So we're going to start with this question of why don't firefighters speak up in these critical moments and what can we do about it? And it seems to me that a major thing that I saw listening and that I heard listening to firefighters is that in the moment when it's time to say something, it's not so clear what to say. It's not so clear when to say it. It's not so clear how to approach the person that needs to hear this, right? So we tend to think it's supposed to be black and white, but when you really listen to people talking about those moments, what you recognize is that there's all this uncertainty, and that uncertainty in the crew dynamic is what leads to people going, well, I'll just wait. I'll wait, right? I'll give you an example of that. How many times, there's somebody there, if you're with a group of people watching this right now, there is somebody who has watched another firefighter backing up a rig, and you have watched that person back right into a pole, and you watch it happen. And as it's happening, you're thinking, they're going to see it, they're going to see it, they're going to see it, and then crunch, right? Why didn't you speak up? Because, right? So this is a key concept. We want to think that speaking up is some simple thing and it's all black and white and you just spout it out when the time is right. But in reality, in the reality of those moments when it really, really counts, it's not quite so clear. So what can you do as a leader? What you can do as a leader is to build the kind of communication on your crew that you need and that you're going to want in those moments when it really counts. And the key thing that you can do is start building clarity. You can start building the clarity now so that it's there when you need it. And I just want to just sort of ask this question. So what is the ideal, right? What is the kind of the end state? If you could have perfect communication, what would it look like? I just want to acknowledge, well, one idea that has been very popular is that what you want is open communication. Everybody says whatever's on their mind, they express their thoughts and feelings, and if that always happened, accidents would never happen. This is an idea that some people have. I disagree with that. I don't think that is the ideal. I think the ideal for crew communication is that the people that work for you know how to serve you as a leader and as a decision maker, and they give you the information that you need, that you want, how you want it, when you can use it, so that you can make better decisions for your crew. So how do you get there? And by the way, that might look different for different leaders and different crews. How do you get there? You need to answer 4 questions. And we're going to go through these one by one, and I'm going to warn you right now, they are going to sound so simple that as you hear it, you're going to go, oh yeah, we got that covered. I can promise you, you don't have it covered. Ask these questions. If it's clear in your mind, then just write down the answers, and then ask one of your crew members to also write down the answer. And it's going to blow your mind when you realize that these questions they seem so simple, so basic, and yet this is a basic thing that it's been right under our noses and we've missed it. Okay, so question number 1. When do you want your people to speak up? Do you want them to speak up when the problem is clearly defined, it's right in front of you, you can define it by, as a textbook, this is exactly what's wrong, and I know it's, do you want that? Do you want them to speak up when they think there might be something going wrong? It's not a problem yet, but it might be a problem. Now here's the tricky part. Whatever you decide, if you want people to speak up early, you can get more information, but it's going to be more fuzzy and some of it's going to be incorrect, right? If you want them to speak up late, only when it's clear, you'll get less input, but even if it's done perfectly, if you have people waiting to speak up till the problem is absolutely crystal clear, what's that going to mean? It's probably going to mean that by the time they speak up, it's too late to do anything about it, right? So as a leader, there is no perfect answer to this. But the challenge is for you to think clearly for yourself, for your crew. Where do you want to draw that line? Where and when do you want your people to speak up? And try to think of it from the perspective of your crew. Not from your perspective as a leader, but from their perspective. I'm supposed to speak up when what? How would you define that? That's question 1. Question 2. One of the things that I noticed interviewing firefighters after close calls and after accidents is they'd, express something about they wish they spoke up, but they didn't, or this sort of thing, right? And one of the things that I started to notice is that I would hear people say, well, I wasn't sure exactly what to say, right? I wasn't sure when to say it, but then I wasn't sure exactly how to, in the moment, right? Now that issue doesn't make sense when you're used to working in a safe, stable environment. Then it's obvious what to say, right? But when things are dynamic and things are changing quickly, and you got to make a decision now, okay, if I'm going to speak up, what exactly am I going to say? If you have a whole bunch of ambiguity and it's wishy-washy and you're not really sure, right? If you can't figure that out in a cool, calm office or training room, how are you going to do it in those moments when it's all hitting the fan, right? And so what you can do as a leader is give your crew the script. Give them the first few words. This is how you do it. When you have a serious concern, when we've crossed whatever that threshold is, when I want you to speak up, to give me the information that I'm asking you for, right? Now the question is, what do you want them to say? How do you want them to start? Don't leave it to chance. Don't tell them if you see something, say something. That's good advice, it's well intended, but it doesn't give people the clarity and the certainty that they need about how to approach it. So that's the second question, is how do you want your people to speak up to let you know that something's going wrong or might be going wrong? How you answer that question depends on your personality. I was doing a class on this with a group of firefighters, and one of the some of the truck guys were in there. One of the truck captains said, "Well, my guys just say I don't effing like this." I thought, all right. And then next to him was a paramedic captain, and he had a different approach for how he wanted his people to speak up. Did another class for a group that included, that their response area included a lot of inner city responses. So some of the warning signs that they were dealing with was like weapons in the home, and people hiding behind, right? And so they wanted a way to speak up that didn't alarm the people that were around them, right? So each of those three captains had a different way that they wanted their crew to speak up and let them know that something was amiss, right? And it was their way. If you work for that captain and you talk how that captain, the truck captain, if you talk like that working for this other captain in the inner city, it may or may not be the right way, right? All right, so that's up to you. That's up to you as a leader, is to decide and to define, how do you want your people to speak up? How do you want them to convey this information to you? The third point is, how can they expect that you're going to respond? Again, this has a lot to do with your temperament as a leader. Some leaders will, the kind of like textbook nice answer to this is, you'll hear people say, oh, well, we'll stop the operation until we address the concerns, and then once we've fully addressed all the concerns, we'll re-engage. That's a perfect answer in a 4S, safe, stable, straightforward environment, right? Is that a realistic answer in a fire environment that's dynamic, ambiguous, risky, and complex? Can you stop everything every time somebody is a little unsure? No, you can't. So what are you going to do? How are you going to respond? So think about that as a leader. And the reason this is important is that whether you act on the concern or not, your crew needs to know that you heard what they said and you're handling it. So they did their job. You said, speak up, do it in this way at this time, and when you do, this is what you can expect from me. Some leaders are going to say, you can expect me, if I heard you, I'll tell you I copy. Some leaders are going to say, and in certain environments, this is correct. This is the right answer. And this may be the right answer for you, and it's probably something in between. Some leaders are going to say, we, because of the complexity of the environment, we will stop. We will have a conversation and work out what the concerns are before we press forward. Sometimes that's the best approach. Another approach, there are some leaders that say, I don't want to hear your concerns until the after action review. Wherever you land on that, I'm not going to tell you what the right answer is. What I am saying is, you got to decide for yourself as a leader, when your folks bring you a concern, what can they expect from you? How do they know that you heard what they said, right? This matters because one of the things that happens consistently in accidents and near misses is, yes, there's this issue that people don't speak up, but there's another issue, which is they do speak up and their valid concerns don't get heard or they don't get recognized. But that's really complex, because in the moment, you don't know if they heard you, if the boss heard you, they dealt with it, they've thought through that, and they're moving on because there's a bigger problem, and that's what they're working on. You don't know if it's that, or your idea was dumb, or they just didn't hear you because they're focused on some other thing, or their radio wasn't on the right thing, or just as you were talking, somebody else broke in, or your battery's on your radio, right? There's all these different things. So you need to establish for your followers a clear response that they can expect from you. And then the next thing, and this is the fourth question, this is the final thing, is, and I kind of already alluded, or I kind of already described this, is it would be nice if the way it worked is every time somebody has a concern and they frame it in the right way, and then they articulate it appropriately in the way that the leader wanted, and every time that happened, the boss heard them the first time. How often do those concerns, even when they are articulated perfectly, how often are they actually heard the first time? Right? Versus how often do they get misinterpreted or lost or somehow slip through the cracks, right? So this is the fourth question, is when your crew member brings you this piece of information, raises the issue, when they don't get the response that they are expecting, what should they do next? What's the next step? And again, that's up to you. Do you want them to say it again? Do you want them to say it again in a different way? Do you want them to say it to someone else? What do you want them to do when they're not getting the response that they were expecting? And just understand that much of the time they're not going to get the response that they're expecting, right? That's the nature of a complex environment. So those are the 4 questions for you as a leader to think about for yourself and to clarify, well, what do I want? So just a couple thoughts here. Don't think of this as, there's this idea sometimes when people talk about upward voice or speaking up about risk, it's often framed as this sort of almost adversarial thing where the crew member has a right to speak up and they should be able to tell the boss when they see a hazard. But honestly, I've talked to a lot of firefighters and leaders, and I don't see that adversarial mentality in the leaders that I talk to. They want communication. They want good communication that's going to help them make better decisions. What they don't want is chaos. What they don't want is more confusion in an already confusing moment. And so I suggest the way to think about this as a leader is not to think about it as a power struggle, but to think about it as you're in charge, and this is about defining from your crew the kind of information and the kind of communication that you want from them. So that's the first thing. The second thing that I just want to point out is understand that at each step of the way, things are going to be complicated. They're going to be difficult. It's not going to happen the right way, right? We so often train and we talk about communication in these idealistic, simplistic ways. That's not reality, right? It ain't going to be perfect. And the moments when communication counts the most, those are the moments when it's hardest to communicate effectively. So we just have to understand that has to be baked into the equation, is that there's going to be these breakdowns all through the system. And that brings me to the third point, is that the kind of communication that you need is not something that you just get it in place and then it's there. We're talking about building communication on your crew. It takes time. It takes time to build those pathways, if you will. It takes time to build those communication practices and to build the kind of trust that comes with that, right? This brings me to my next point. So you've answered 4 questions, and I want to invite you that I wrote a little ebook. It's available for you it's a training guide called How to Build Risk Communication Protocols. How to Build Risk Communication Protocols. It's a training guide. It's available for you. I wrote it kind of for the company officer level leader. And in that book, we kind of walk through each of the 4 questions, show how different people answer them, how different people think about them. But by the time you get to the end, once you've answered the 4 questions, you've actually created for yourself at least the first rough draft of a framework that you can use for structuring communication on your crew. By answering the 4 questions, you've created like a rough draft of risk communication protocols for your crew. But the thing is, we all know that you can have the greatest protocols, the greatest idea, the greatest system on earth, and it will fail you unless you train with it, unless you practice it, right? So once you have this system in place, you got to incorporate that into your drills so that you create these situations where your crew in training has to bring you information that's important, that, that's part of the training, right? And so then the idea is to build up these reps, right? And then the idea is that this kind of communication isn't some big dramatic moment of hand-wringing, do I, don't I, will I, won't, right? It should just be, look, when you call in a water drop and the helicopter's coming in and you see some power lines, you don't fret over how to tell them, how do I tell the pilot about the power? You just tell them, hey, there's power lines, out your right door, right? You just tell him there's power lines there. And then he goes, and when he comes back with his next drop, what do? Do you go, I don't know if I should tell him about the power lines. I don't want to embarrass him. Will he be offended if I meant? No, you just say, yeah, there's those power lines at your, wherever they are, right? Why? Why is it not a big deal? Because we have a system for communicating about power lines. We know that that's how you talk to a pilot, is you call out the hazards, even if you think he already saw them, even if you said it before, that's just the system. It's not a big deal. The system is clear and we've trained to it, right? So it's not a big deal to call out those issues, right? So that's the kind of communication that you're seeking to build on your crew. And the way you do that is through getting the reps in. So that if you're in those moments that count, you don't at that moment create the kind of communication that you need. You already got that kind of communication. You built it on your crew, so it's there when you need it. So does this guarantee that you're never going to miss anything ever again? You know, does this put you in a position where you're going to have perfect communication, nothing's going to go wrong, it's always going to be safe? It doesn't. But what it does is it gives you a fighting chance that if you're in one of these moments with your crew and it's time to make a big decision, you at least got a fighting chance to get the information that you need if there's somebody there that sees something important, that they know how to articulate that to you in service to you as the leader and the decision maker. Thanks.